Trump's racist supporters coming to his defense. Have you noticed that? Every time he gets indicted with yet more criminal activity, because of more criminal activity, the racist rhetoric of his brown shirts becomes even more intense. And right before the break, I mentioned this crazy thing named Abigail down in Texas who threatened to kill U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan, who is presiding over the case against the orange bastard for trying to overthrow the government. And the language that she used, I mean, the viciousness, the evil, the sickness, and the stupidity of these people. She leaves a message on, obviously, on Judge Chutkan's, on one of the phones in Judge Chutkan's chambers. She leaves a message easily identified as who she is, and the names that she called the judge are just, well, you know. And meanwhile, here in Atlanta, Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis is getting the same kind of bullshit. Racist threats, death threats, violence perpetrated by ignorant whites who don't have the sense God gave a locust, for God's sake. And now, here in Atlanta, I think I mentioned this yesterday, the names and addresses of the grand jurors who returned those indictments wound up on a pro-Trump bullshit website, according to NBC. And NBC said that one of the responses to the list on this bullshit website said, quote, "These jurors have signed their death warrant by falsely indicting President Trump." You know, first of all, the threats, but I've asked this before, and I know I should stop asking because it's a ridiculous question. How can these people continue to say that Trump has been falsely indicted? We've had 3.5 years of investigations into this son of a bitch, mountains of evidence, transcripts, texts, phone calls, recordings, videos. It's incredible how easily somebody can become brainwashed, how people can become a true believer, which, by the way, I'm going to mention again, is a book written by Eric Hoffer. It's entitled The True Believer. It was written in the 50s. Eric Hoffer was an American Jew. I think he was an immigrant to this country. Well, maybe he was native born, but he was a longshoreman in San Diego or Long Beach, California, probably Long Beach. And he wrote this book, a very brilliant man. He just decided he wanted to be a longshoreman, but he wrote the book, The True Believer. And one of the 2 or 3 books I've recommended, the other one being the one about the Rabbi of Nazareth, Jesus, the book entitled Zealot. But this one, I mentioned it before, it's 60, 70 years old. It was written that long ago. The True Believer by Eric Hoffer, Hoffer. You ought to read it. Now, it was just a matter of time, of course, before these kinds of death threats and insults and filthy language would be used against public officials and just normal citizens like you, like me. If we're considered normal, I wonder sometimes how normal I am. But, we're just average. Let me put it that way. We're just average citizens. And people just like us who are holding Trump accountable for the first time in his useless, filthy life, these people are having to endure these explicit threats and the violence. And the only question, and Eugene Robinson, writing at the Post, he also brought this up, as have a number of people on MSNBC, the only question is whether the members of the Republican Party, the Christian fascists, if they are going to pretend that they don't notice these threats, these insults, this vicious, vile, hate-filled language, this violence. And if they are going to pretend they don't notice, that's the same thing as actively participating. The only thing necessary for the success, of evil is for good people to do nothing. I know I'm completely blowing that quotation, but that's so explicitly true now. And not a single one, with the exception of Chris Christie, and even his attacks against Trump have been a bit muted, but I understand. But not a single so-called Republican candidate in these primaries has said a goddamn word to fully and thoroughly and completely condemn what Trump is inspiring people to do. It's just, further proof, if any is needed, about the fact that the Republican Party does not exist anymore. Now, according to Eugene Robinson, in addition to Fani Willis, there are two other African-American prosecutors who were going after this orange bastard. The New York County District Attorney Alvin Bragg, and those charges are they're criminal. That's right, criminal charges of Trump falsified business records. And New York Attorney General Letitia James, who's suing Trump in a civil case for tax fraud. And the clear implication of these threats and the rotten language and the attacks coming from these Trump thugs is that Black Americans have no right to sit in judgment of their MAGA hero, the brother of Jesus, Donald Trump. And this is also part of the claim of the crazy bitch down in Texas. What's her name? I forget her name. Abigail Joe. Yeah, hey, Abigail, how's everything in the trailer park? Oh, come on, Mike, don't be a shit. Anyway, when you consider the demographics of New York, Miami, D.C., and Atlanta, it's all but certain that there were African Americans on all of these grand juries that have indicted Trump on all of these charges. And because they performed their civic duty, they went when called. They listened. They sat there for hours upon hours upon hours, some of them days upon days, weeks, listening to this shit over and over again. These men and women, all of them, risk being targeted as riggers. Riggers. Now, one of the aspects of Georgia state courts that I didn't know about, and let me digress a second. I think I've learned more about law in the past 2 or 3 years just from watching MSNBC and all the qualified and very adept attorneys that they've had on there, prosecutors and defense attorneys and members of the Justice Department. I feel like I've almost gotten the first year at least of law school. How about you, huh? But I've also learned that in the state courts here in Georgia, grand jurors' names are listed in the indictments that they hand up, which in a rational society, there would be no problem with that. But we don't live in a rational society. No other personal information other than their names is put on these forms. But these slime that worship Donald Jesus Trump are putting up on these fringe social media websites what they say are photographs and addresses of some of the Fulton County grand jurors. And here in Fulton County, officials have declined to comment on what, if any, security arrangements have been made, which is the way it's supposed to be. You don't talk about your security arrangements. Why would you? Opposing armies don't reveal their battle plans. And that's where we are. We are in a war. You do know that, right? You do agree with that? We are in a war in this country. It's being fought entirely differently from wars in the past, but it's a war nonetheless. And I've said before, I have a deep-seated fear that it's going to break into a hot war, a shooting war, eventually. But anyway, some stats for you. According to the Census Bureau, a plurality of Fulton County population, 45%. is African American. It's not a majority, but it's a plurality. And on Monday night, if you were watching television, you saw a black female officer from the sheriff's department take the Trump indictment. Remember this? It was, I think she was the clerk of the courts. And this was, what, at 11, 10 o'clock at night? She took the Trump indictments to Judge Robert McBurney, who's a white man, for his signature. And he gave them a very cursory look over and signed them. And then a black female official, another one, guarded by black law enforcement personnel, took the paperwork to the county clerk's office for processing. And then finally, Fani Willis, who obviously is black, made a brief appearance before reporters. That drives white, racist thugs, bastards, son of a bitches in this country absolutely batshit. All of, and I even commented on Wednesday, I think I said it is ironically delicious to me, or deliciously ironic, or whatever, that so many of the people involved in forcing this hideous, subhuman Donald Trump to finally face some kind of accountability for his actions, that this army of judges and attorneys and law enforcement, to a huge, huge degree, are black folk. I just find that pleasurable. I mean, I really do. Trump's attorney, one of them, who has totally disgraced everything he's ever touched. I'm talking about, and Trump's co-defendant, the Bat, Rudy Greasy-Haired Giuliani. He admitted recently in a sworn court document that all these allegations against Shaye Moss and her mother, Ruby Freeman, everything was nothing but lies. The son of a bitch admitted that. But the orange vomit, Trump, he has not taken anything back. He's not backtracked 1 inch and said, yeah, well, Giuliani's right. We were just trying to fuck over these people. No. And in his post where he used the word riggers, he claimed that this coming Monday, he's going to present a report that vindicates everything, all of his election fraud claims, everything. It's going to make him a free man. Oh, my God. And everybody is just waiting with abated breath. Oh, wait, guess what's going to happen Monday? Ta-da, 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 ta-da. Trump is going to finally reveal everything. Well, guess what? Last night, about 10 o'clock at night, word traveled through media that the orange bastard says, well, I'm not going to be holding a news conference next week after all. That was the one who was going to unveil his evidence of fraud in Georgia's 2020 presidential election, fraud that never occurred. But the slimy, orange, sniveling bastard, he cited the advice of his lawyers. This is what he wrote on his little putrid site last night. Quote, rather than releasing the report on the rigged and stolen Georgia 2020 presidential election on Monday, my lawyers would prefer putting this, I believe, irrefutable and overwhelming evidence of election fraud and irregularities in formal legal filings as we fight to dismiss this disgraceful indictment. End quote. Going to have a major news conference, right, at his golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey. And he was going to distribute to the American media almost complete report that would exonerate him. Now, he throws that out there so he can, earlier this week, so he could suck more money out of these crazy, insane white people who can't afford a pot to piss in, but they will send money to their Lord and Savior, Donald Jesus Trump, because, George Soros and the Jews and the liberals are after Mr. Trump, our beloved leader, right? Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.